Hey, what's up? I'm Hoxie. I play games, make games, and everything in between. And today we're going to be talking about asset creation in HypeHype. HypeHype is a revolutionary app that lets you make and play mobile games on your phone. If you'd like more information on this, check out my previous videos or go to HypeHype.com. One of the coolest things about HypeHype is that it is just full of all kinds of assets from different players. You can have objects, cars, trees, walls, buildings, spaceships, and HypeHype gives the ability for anybody to make assets in Blender and submit them to HypeHype, and allows anybody to use these assets. Below I have links to the HypeHype asset creation instructions. If you like this kind of video, hit that like, subscribe, and the bell notification as I continuously put out updates around making and playing games. I have used Blender a little bit, but I am not that proficient in it, as whenever I use Blender, I use it for a couple of days and then go months without using it. For this video, I asked StickEE to help me. He has made a bunch of cool games in HypeHype and submitted multiple assets to HypeHype, so I got his input on the process of making and submitting the assets. I wanted to go through what he learned from the asset creation instructions from HypeHype, and was cool enough to share his blend file with me so we could go through it as we go through the asset creation instructions. Fun stuff about StickEE is he has only been using HypeHype for a few months, just like me, although his games are so much cooler than mine. StickEE is also new to HypeHype, however, he mentions that he did make a few games in Fancade and LBP, Little Big Planet, and Super Mario Maker. He said he got the inspiration for making assets in Blender because he saw someone do it on Reddit, which happened to be a kid that was similar to his age, and he was like, why not me? Then he started using Blender, which is pretty fascinating because Blender is difficult. Being able to work through the difficulty shows a lot of tenacity. When I asked him about the process of inputting models, he said his biggest issue was having to name the models. StickEE has made about 30 hypes in total, and his favorite game is Brett and Brute. Before we get started, he said he's got 2 tips for model making. First tip is to bevel everything, and the second tip is to don't give up. Your first submission should obviously not be accepted, and that's okay. Then his tip for submitting models is to take all the suggestions that HypeHype gives you so that your model can be better, and sooner or later you'll be able to drag, squash, stretch, and rotate the model in HypeHype to your heart's content. I asked him about the collisions. He said every aspect of HypeHype model is made in Blender. The mesh, the place you can add your own colors, the collision areas, the origin point, all of that is made in Blender. When I asked StickEE for any tips for encouragement when it comes to making assets, he says it might be hard and overwhelming at first, but don't quit because of that. Take your time, watch some tutorials, learn how HypeHype and Blender's layout works, learn some shortcuts, and you'll be set for life. Also, in the case of making models, it's actually easier to make models for HypeHype than for any other game because you have less things to do than you would have otherwise. You don't need UV textures, you don't need normal maps, heck, you don't even need to plan out a scene. Just move some verts around, assign some materials, use HypeHype Blender add-on, and voila, your model is done. I think it's great talking to someone who has already done this. When you're new to something, it can often seem overwhelming. Seeing that a teenager was able to go into Blender, make assets, submit into HypeHype, and now those are in the app for anybody to make is pretty cool. Let's take a look at this document, HypeHype Asset Creation Instructions. Prologue. Hello creator, you've come to the right place if you're looking to create 3D assets for HypeHype. Assets created by the community go through a little moderation step to check that the assets work and quality matches HypeHype's standards, and then they will appear in the asset library for usage. Credits will be given to the original creator, and if possible, the creator's HypeHype account will be linked to the asset. Creating the asset from scratch will follow these simple steps. Open the document outline to quickly jump between the headlines. Don't let the document's length throw you off guard. The steps are simple, and once you go through them a few times, you'll be able to gain some significant speed in asset creation. Currently, we support and encourage creating simple, basic objects, meaning that animations and rigged characters need to be left out from the process for now. Download example assets here. File is in blend format. Here's the .blend example format from HypeHype that shows you convex, cone, zero, cylinder, capsule, box, sphere, asset direction, and then example asset packages. And what's cool here is you can actually see the collision model. This is what I was really curious about. If you haven't used Blender before, it is the best free software out there for making 3D models. I've used it a few times. When I use it, it's only for a couple of days, and then I go months without using it again. Software, we have Frogmine use Blender for HypeHype's asset creation process. It's a free lightweight desktop 3D editor to avoid problems that may occur with other 3D editors. Regarding the finished assets, we strongly recommend using Blender. There are lots of tutorials on YouTube for making all kinds of simple to complex objects in Blender, generally starting out with making a donut. Here, HypeHype talks about ownership and rights. As users of the platform, we'll be able to use the assets in their hypes. Thus, we need to receive full rights to use the assets in any way on the HypeHype platform, including web and anywhere else where the platform may expand to, and in all communication and materials related to the platform, including online videos and images. And as you probably understand, these rights need to be given also to all other users making content on and about the platform. The rights do not need to be exclusive though. You can use the same assets elsewhere in your other creations. The above is an overview of the terms. Please read the details from HypeHype's terms and service at XXX. By submitting assets, you agree to these terms. That makes sense. In HypeHype, it's very easy to make, remake, remix games. For anybody making games in HypeHype, they need to be able to legally use those assets in whatever game they create, and this helps resolve any legal issues that may come down the line, because if somebody makes a cool object and then somebody makes a cool game or multiple games using that cool object, those rights to the objects need to be fair use for whoever is making a game from said object. Next, we got art style. HypeHype as a creation platform allows creators to use any kind of art style available. We offer 3D assets in various art styles and will continue to expand these selections of styles in the future. Currently, the generic art style execution in HypeHype revolves around simple shapes with rounded edges and flat materials, which is a common hyper-casual look in general. Another art style is a polygon, flat shaded version of the simple shape style. Characters have their own art style categorization. Below are some examples of the assets we have in our engine. Our asset pipeline consists of simple, stylized shapes of geometry. Currently, we do not support any texture maps, normal maps. An asset consists of its visual object and one or more collision objects. All individual assets must be as separate objects. One object can have multiple meshes. Objects must not have any visible back face as they are not rendered in HypeHype. Additionally, make sure all faces have proper normal direction. Poly counts in visual objects need to be naturally manageable, but high enough to keep nice silhouettes and rounded shapes, as creators may want to use them close to the camera. Poly count should depend on the asset's physical size and estimate of usage amount. As a game scene example, usually there are lots of lower poly count plants, but only a few higher poly count buildings. These are some examples. The football has 356 tris, and a racing car has about 1600 tris. I'll be honest with you, I do not know what a tris is. Usually, visual objects are fully smooth shaded, but some assets may use a few sharp edges for a stylized purpose. Double vertices, edge split, modifier in Blender with edges marked for sharpness. And then here are some cool examples. I'm not sure what kind of plant this is supposed to be, maybe a cactus? I was thinking a durian, but definitely a cactus. And then here are some cool examples of walls, and we have the visual example that is the same that we see in Blender. To speed up the process of asset creation, we have an add-on that will handle both UVs and material vertex coloring of the visual models. Download the HypeHype.py Blender add-on from here. Before using, make sure the visual objects has 1 to 4 materials in it correctly assigned. To use it, select the visual object and search for HypePaint. Press spacebar to open search. It will assign vertex colors based on the materials in that order and generate proper UV for the visual models. UV, you can skip this part if you use our HypeHype add-on. To set the UVs manually, follow the steps below. As stated, neither diffuse, texture maps, or normal maps are supported. However, all assets must have proper UV maps. So it sounds like the move is to use the add-on. Next we got material mapping. All materials are created in HypeHype and the information from the material masking is done using vertex colors. When modeling, default Blender material setups can be used for predicting the final results of in-game or materials. These are usually just flat colors and some nice looking roughness values added. You can have copy materials from the example Blender files we provided. Just change the colors and values to fit whatever you're working on. We usually have an Eevee preview enabled, which does not show vertex colors by default. Switch to solid shading mode to work with vertex colors. Our example file can be used as a base for modeling in the correct scale reference using our preview materials and taking reference from topology, polycount, UVs, collision meshes, and naming. You can skip this part if you use our HypeHype add-on. According to StickEE, he used the HypeHype add-on and said that it helped make everything a lot easier. Oh, this looks cool. See what we got over here. These materials are just preview materials created in Blender for predicting the final results. They can be anything as long as they are flat colors. Also max 4 as that what the end result supports in the engine. Collision models. In HypeHype, the engine uses collision models or collision mesh objects to calculate all physical properties and collisions for the object. All assets must have collision models specifically fitted for each unique asset. Collision mesh objects do not use materials, vertex colors, or UVs. Collision models usually consist of simple mesh types. These meshes must be as separate objects in Blender. For example, the lamppost asset consists of 3 collision mesh objects: cylinder, cylinder, box. Collision mesh is a simplified version of the visual object sketching out main shapes of the asset. Here we have some good examples, specifically this bed. The collision is 3 rectangles, all different sizes, kind of mimicking what the bed looks like. Then here's another asset example: cylinder, cylinder, box. An asset can have multiple collision meshes as separate objects. Their origins have to match to visual asset. Use appropriate collision type meshes. This asset has 3 collision meshes, 2 cylinders, and 1 box. That's a great visual. And next we got the types of collision meshes: performance 10 to a performance 5 of a convex object. And then we can see the examples, which are the same examples here in the example.blend file that HypeHype provides. Collision models must absolutely follow these strict rules. Box must not have any diagonal edges. Use the convex mesh instead. Cylinder must have only straight edged faces pointing to either X, Y, or Z, and no diagonal edges. Cylinder can point only to either X, Y, or Z direction. Do not smoothen, bevel, or inset any collision meshes. All collision meshes must be convex in shape, even if that type is not convex. Mesh and origin. Each asset must have an origin post set very specifically. The origin point of an asset is determined by the center of mass of its related collision meshes combined. To figure out what the asset's origin should be in Blender, use the object mode join all of its collision mesh objects, not the visual objects, into one object. Then use the set origin tool with origin to center of mass volume. Now you can copy the origin to the visual asset or example using the 3D cursor. Remember to separate the collision mesh objects after this process. In Blender, visual objects must share the exact same origin points as the collision mesh objects, but they don't need to be on top of each other. Example in reference file. Here we can see that they are behind each other. The link to this asset creation instructions is below. Feel free to take a look at it at your own pace. Collision meshes must be smooth, shaded with no double vertices, hard edges. They must have proper normal direction and must not have any holes. Our engines use the collision mesh vertices for snapping points in HypeHype editor, especially if you're creating tiling assets. Think how the collision mesh snaps with other objects. This is cool. It's referencing how objects come together in a game made with HypeHype. Finally, make sure all the collision mesh objects have their rotation and scale applied. Asset naming. StickEE said for him was the most difficult. Asset naming is an essential part of the pipeline as it includes the collision model information and asset category information for the engine. Names for the visual objects and collision objects are separate. Asset names must not have any spaces. Instead, they use underscores. Also, underscores are reserved for type category separation. So single asset names with spaces must be discarded. And the example is rubber duck. Here we can see it's put to all rubber duck in lowercase. Asset names must start with com following the creator's name in common alphabet. It must not include any spaces or special characters. Here I would put com underscore hypec underscore rubber duck. Lastly, add a variation index starting with 00. This is especially important if you have assets with variations that still share the asset name. And then there's a straightforward example. Collision mesh objects must be named starting with the visual asset name and following the collision mesh under :00. If you have multiple collision mesh objects, name them incrementally. Example :00, :01, :02. There can be up to 20 collision mesh objects for a single visual asset. Lastly, add the corresponding collision mesh type from the collision mesh type list above. Here's the collision model types. We got convex, X, cone, O, cylinder C, capsule E, box B, and sphere for S. Here we have an example lamppost. The asset belongs to the category city rounded. This asset name is lamp, being of the second variation 01, and thus it's named city rounded lamp 01. Its collision meshes are named lamp 01, :00B for boxes, lamp 01 underscore :00. Okay, I can see why StickEE said this was complicated. I did not understand at first, but when you're making multiple assets and you have to make sure that all these are named properly, it's probably tedious but important for organization and categorization of said assets. And any assets that have multiple mesh pieces all have to have a separate naming convention. Okay, so those things do add up. Exporting assets. Assets are not exported separately, but instead a whole package are exported as a single FBX file. To make sure your asset is ready for exporting, follow these steps. Apply rotation and scales to both visual and collision objects. Select the objects, then select object. Apply rotation and scale. Make sure the asset's visual object's origin points match collision objects. Make sure the assets have no unintended modifiers that may alter the UV or vertex colors. If you have used the edge split modifier for sharp edges, do not apply it to the mesh. Use the triangular modifier if your mesh has lots of n-gons. Make sure the asset's naming is correct and the collision mesh names match with the visual object. Make sure the file does not have any extra unintended to be exported objects. All of your assets and collisions go in the same one exported file. And we're going to be taking a look at StickEE's most recent submission to HypeHype in a moment. I think it's cool to see what someone is actually done, and again, thank you StickEE for sharing that. Export in the FBX format with Blender's default settings. Make sure that the apply modifier setting is enabled. Publish and review. Once you're done, double check that all points are checked. Fill up the form linked below and upload your asset file in FBX format, then just submit. Here's the link to the submission form. We will check that the asset works and the quality matches HypeHype standards. The results will either be accept or a reject. If your asset application is accepted, your assets will be added to the HypeHype community asset library with the given asset and credit information. If you have shared your HypeHype account in the form, a link to your profile will be created in the asset. If your asset application is rejected, it will be declined and you will be notified with possible fixes required to be made. Come back to this guide and check that the asset creation didn't miss a step, then just resend your fixed asset form. That is a lot of steps. It does seem straightforward, but then a lot of hoops. If you enjoy making assets in Blender, submitting them to HypeHype is a great way to get those assets used in games made by other hypesters. Taking a look, here is some of the stuff that StickEE made. We got some cool stuff like an umbrella and a tissue box. That's pretty cool. Everybody needs tissues. Next we got what's like a magic hat, and we can see that this is the visual object, and behind it is the collision, and that goes for all of these. This one's my favorite. This is onigiri. You can get these anywhere in Asia. And here we can see we got some swords, with the collision being 1, 2 objects. And we got a milk carton, a coffin, that's super cool, and the coffin has a base and a lid, which means you can have it open up in a game. Oh, I think this one is actually my favorite, the spikes. The potential to use this in any kind of game, kind of like Fall Guys, is definitely a must. I really like this door too. I don't know why, I just think it's cool. Maybe because it's not a basic rectangle door. Not sure what this is. It kind of looks like Chinese checkers game or a map or something. And then we have an arrow and a crown. Ooh, crown, that's cool. I didn't know about that one. Oh wow, and then we got some big stuff over here. Looks like we got a birdhouse, a big pencil, a guitar, a tree house, and a tree. That's the process one has to go through to submit a game into HypeHype. Definitely takes some time, but once you get into it, things only get easier. That's it for this video. Special thanks to StickEE for helping answer questions on the asset creation process. Be sure to check him out on HypeHype, follow him. And if you see him around on the HypeHype Discord, let him know what models you would like, because he might just make them for you. If you like this kind of content, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you have any questions or comments, be sure to let me know below. And until next time, I'm HypeC. See you later, and peace.